Welcome, everyone. We are really excited to have you join us as part of this Scholar Journey series that we have started for the postdocs, research scholars, as well as doctoral students. We hope this series will give you insights into the different and unique trajectories you can take and how you might perhaps think about your own journey and what you might uniquely contribute to the world through your scholarship and research. So we are very excited to have Dr. Jonathan Deutsch join us today as the first in our speaker series. Dr. Deutsch is a professor in the departments of Food and Hospitality Management and Nutrition Sciences at Drexel University and a certified hospitality educator. Before moving to Drexel, Dr. Deutsch built the Culinary Arts program at Kingsborough Community College, City University of New York, and the PhD concentration in food studies at the City University of New York Graduate Center and School of Public Health. At Drexel, he's the founding director of the Drexel Food Lab, a culinary innovation and food product research and development lab focused on solving real-world food system problems in the areas of sustainability, health promotion, and access. So you must have seen Dr. Deutsch's work. He's always in the news, lots of really exciting and innovative work. And we're really excited, especially because he brings both academic and industry experience. So I hope you'll listen closely to his thought processes and what he brings uniquely to his scholarship. He's also the author or editor of 8 books, including Barbecue, A Global History, Culinary Improvisation, and Gastropolis, Food and Culture in New York City, as well as numerous articles in journals of food studies, public health, and hospitality education. He earned his PhD in food studies and food management from New York University, his culinary degree from the Culinary Institute of America, and is a proud alumnus of the Drexel University BS in hospitality management. A classically trained chef, Dr. Deutsch worked in a variety of settings, including food product development, small luxury inns, and restaurants. When he's not in the kitchen, he can be found behind his tuba. So he's a multi-talented artist. So welcome, Dr. Deutsch. We are excited to have you present to us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So what I thought we would do is, you read a little bit about my background, hopefully. Did you? Or some of you are nodding. Okay, half of you, maybe. I thought I would not rehash that, but just kind of leave that. Well, I'll give you some context for it. It's the sort of grand dame of nutrition, public health, especially lately, is a professor named Marion Nestle, who's professor emerita from NYU. She's always in the news. So if you're not familiar with her, now that I said her name, you'll hear her on NPR tonight and see her in the Times and so on. On anything related to food and food politics. So a lot of her work was around an exploration and critique of the dietary guidelines for Americans, process and my plate and the food pyramid and all that kind of stuff, and how what should be a sort of best practice science-based policy is actually a negotiation among various interests like food companies and politicians who represent states that are, or regions that are particularly big into, certain crops and certain commodities, and then export and being self-sufficient and having good food sovereignty and not relying on countries that we don't want to do business with. And so it's much more complicated than a sort of empirical, summary of what we should be eating and why, right? So she retired a few years ago, and the NYU, and we're at I think the 25th anniversary of the NYU Food Studies program that she founded, and which was really the first program to combine nutrition, public policy, food management and really kind of integrate these things, and really have a degree focusing on cultural and social aspects of food and nutrition. It was sort of, there were the food anthropologists of the world and social scientists, and there were the nutritionists and dietitians, but there wasn't really a program that integrated things before that one, at least in the US. And so as part of her celebration of her work and a celebration of the anniversary of the program, some of the current faculty put together this an edited volume of sort of reflections and sort of state of the field contributions from their faculty and doctoral students and doctoral alumni from the program. So I was invited to contribute, and that was my contribution. So that's that. And I thought I would kind of set that aside for now, tell you a little bit about our lab and the work we're doing at Drexel. Dahlia and Cynthia are part of that work, so can speak to it as well. And then I'm going to try to do all of that relatively quickly. And the point of the talking about the lab is really so you know some other things that are happening within CNHP that you could get involved in, or just good to know what's happening. And then we can have more of a discussion, and I'm hoping you'll have questions, you know, sort of for me or about your own work and trajectories and things like that. And we can keep it pretty informal and discussion based. Does that work for everybody? Great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and take you through a little bit of a deck and some examples of our work, and we can elaborate on that if we feel we need to. You know, I don't need to tell you about Drexel, but I will tell you that Drexel is very unique in being the only Carnegie R1 research university in the country that has a culinary arts degree program. And I was brought in, so I attended Drexel, and 3-4 provosts ago, there was a guy named Mark Greenberg, who, when I was a student at Drexel, was the director of the honors program, and I was his student. And he became provost, and he asked me to be on a task force that was reimagining what was then the Goodwin College, which was the former evening college. And it was a college made up of all the sort of professional programs like sport management and engineering technology, construction management, and we were culinary and hospitality were there as well. Although our roots at the university go back to the original home ec program in 1891. So when I was a student at Drexel, we were in the Nesbitt College of Home Economics, which became the Nesbitt College of Design Arts, which became the College of Media Arts and Design. And that was the point at which they kicked us out because they said, we're doing media and food has nothing to do with media, which of course now we could look at it that differently. And we went to the Goodwin College. The College of Media Arts and Design is now the Westfall College. So things change, and we've always been sort of the unwanted stepchild of the university, and that continues to this day, where we have an interim chair over 2 departments. Very reluctantly, I think she'll be the first to say, but we can consult with Kusuma about that. So we're very unique, and I was brought in really to this committee to advise on what does it mean. I was doing culinary research in New York. What does it mean to be a research university with a culinary program, and what is culinary research? Because at the time we weren't really having any grants or publications or things that were typical of a research university happening in the culinary program. And so there was a thought about, well, should we close it? Should we enliven it? Should we, how do we do, should we hire? And if so, who do we hire? And so that was kind of the debate. And so my solution to this was something called the Drexel Food Lab. And that exists. We started in 2014, sort of mentored and inspired by Mark Greenberg, and then surviving 3 subsequent provosts, and now very much aligned with the current strategic plan. So Mark, I think, was very forward thinking, but didn't quite know how things would shake out. And so very simply, the Drexel Food Lab is a student-driven, faculty-mentored food product design and culinary innovation lab, solving good food problems in sustainability, health promotion, and access. And the best of those projects do all 3. We have 1 full-time employee, Rachel Sherman, who's our chef manager. She's wonderful. And then me, when I'm not wearing my professor hat, I'm wearing my director hat. And then we have a part-time product designer, Lindsay Kerr, and everyone else is students, and students ranging from undergrad in culinary, nutrition, hospitality, product design, environmental science, math over the years, through doctoral students like Dahlia and Cynthia. And we actually have a postdoc, Mei Chung, who some of you probably remember, who is now at the Monell Chemical Senses Center across the street, but plays in our kitchen when she's not over there. So it's been great. And then there are faculty collaborators. So Dr. Milliron, who is Cynthia and Dahlia's mentor, is very closely involved. We meet weekly in our lab meetings. And Dr. Sekon, Jasreen Sekon, who's a food scientist, is a collaborator with us. Dr. Raj Suri, who's in Lebeau. We do a lot of consumer research with our marketing folks. So Dr. Suri is a vice provost, and he's in the marketing department in Lebeau. And then Dr. Hassan Ayaz, who is does neuro research, and together they do neuromarketing. He's in the School of Biomedical Engineering. So, and then alumni, which is great. So a couple of our doctoral students, one is now Siddharth Bhatt, who's now at Penn State, Hong Jun Yi, who's now at Clarkson. So it's great that it sort of self-perpetuates. And the work we do, we always say we're developing 2 products. So one product, of course, is the food product, but the real product is our future colleagues in the food industry. And this relates to my chapter that I shared, that really traditional culinary, nutrition, food science education is not very problematized. It's very kind of technical. You will learn how to develop a food product or calculate a death curve for food processing, but you don't really know why, and you're not questioning the system very much. There are public health and food policy and nutrition policy really look at things with more of that critical lens. And our idea is to really combine those 2 things, to work at the intersection of the food systems and policy and improving the system we have, but not in terms of advocacy and legislation. Not that that's not important, but there's plenty of people doing that, but through practical, technical solutions. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. Our principles are very simple. Do good, feed well, keep going. So do good means all of our projects have some social benefit. Feed well means everything is tasty, first and foremost. And then keep going means they're sustainable, market-driven solutions. So we use a human-centered design-inspired process. We do a bunch of research, we ideate, and we come up with food prototypes. We typically don't actually make anything for sale. We strictly do the R&D. And there's lots of ways to engage with us. We do trend tours, we do shelf life, nutrition, formulation, sensory work, menu design, and so on. And we do this work for the real world. So we work with startups through multinationals, and we also work with, we have a CDC grant right now with the city of Philadelphia. We had some funding from the World Wildlife Foundation, which hopefully we'll get again, nonprofit, and so on. So just to give you like some samples of projects we've worked on that I think are good. Here are two of our grad students, and Zuri Masood is master's alum in food science, and Sheetal Bayurat is a master's alum in culinary arts and science. A lot of our sustainability work is around this idea of upcycling, and upcycling very simply is using food that would otherwise be wasted and making a value-added food product with that food. So this is, I think, a great example of upcycling. In the process of making guacamole for an event, Sheetal noticed this giant mound of avocado pits, which she smartly rebranded seeds, and wondered if there's anything that could be done with them, and did some research and found it could be used in dyes for clothing. It can be used in different ways. And she made a beverage, a ready to drink antioxidant rich beverage from these avocado seeds. And it's currently on the market. So she did her master's thesis in the lab on this product together with me and with Dr. Sekon. This is another example. This is an example of our work with CDC. It's funded by the Sodium Reduction in Communities program. And they gave a mandate to reduce sodium, especially hidden sources of sodium. So most of us consume far too much sodium. Most of it is not from our salt shaker or the salt next to our stove. It's in the form of processed foods. And it's often in foods that we don't think of as salty, and bread is a great example. So bread is one of the largest contributors to the sodium in our diet. And if I ask most of you to describe the taste of bread, salty would be very low on the list of its properties, but it's still very high sodium. So we worked with a regional baker named Amorosos to reformulate institutional hoagie rolls. It's pretty easy to find low sodium sliced bread, whole wheat bread, things like that in the store, but very hard to source institutionally. So, it was a classic sort of public health disconnect where the city was saying to schools and city agencies, you need to buy reduced sodium bread. And they were saying, we're happy to buy it, but no one bothered to tell the bakers and suppliers of bread that these regulations were coming and they weren't available on the market. So, and then when we talked to bakers, they would say, well, salt is very important in other reasons beyond just the flavor. It regulates the yeast, it retards the growth, and it does all these other things in terms of moisture and regulating the dough proofing process. But they hadn't actually tried it. So we worked with them to try it. And this is just this one sodium reduction took 1,300 pounds of salt annually out of the Philly school district, just one account. So that's what 1,300 pounds of salt looks like. So we're really proud of that work. Some other stuff, just to give you some examples, we've done vegetarian and vegan menu refresh for Aramark. We're working right now on a Coulter grant to do an alternative to therapeutic ice cream like Ensure and Boost. That's been a big part of our work. We've done some consumer education work. This is a cooked from frozen seafood project. And a lot of this has its roots in just asking what if. So this came out of a conversation I had with the head of food waste for the World Wildlife Fund, and his question was, so the problem was At most supermarkets in the US, unless you're at like some super fancy high-end coastal place, but if you know, the Giants and ShopRites and Walmarts of the world where most people buy their fish, almost everything at the seafood counter has previously been frozen. And so it's frozen in a very high quality way, typically on the boat, flash frozen. And then people have a perception that the defrosted, previously frozen seafood is somehow better than the frozen seafood. And so they want to go to the fish counter and see this giant display of fish on ice, which yesterday was perfectly frozen in the walk-in freezer. It's defrosted, it's displayed, and also it's displayed abundantly because no one wants to walk into the supermarket and see one little fillet of fish on an empty tray. They want to see these like mounds of seafood. And then at the end of the day, that is either chilled and resold the next day, so you're getting old seafood, or it's thrown away. So we're killing all of these animals for food and then not eating them. And so the seafood counter has become the most wasteful by dollar value department in the supermarket. So he has a very kind of simple question, which is, well, I don't understand. If I cook a hamburger or a hot dog on the grill, you know, it comes right out of the freezer and I don't need to defrost it and waste all that time and energy and food. Why couldn't I do this with fish? And it turns out you can. And consumers love this idea, but they need a lot of education to do it. So that's just a quick example of some other stuff. So our work is supported philanthropically. Some examples of our students, this I have to update, but I mentioned May, who's a postdoc at Monell. Anna was our math major, who's now a line cook at Royal Boucherie. Laura has her undergrad in nutrition and is working on her grad food science degree. Eric just graduated, has interest in sustainable ag and rooftop farming. So I put this in here because I think when I say our work is student driven, a lot of people, you know, picture like 18-year-olds running around in oversized chef hats. But, you know, we have students like Cynthia, who's a physician, and you know, May, who's a postdoc. So we always emphasize that. And then ultimately, you know, we're all about our alumni, you know, as I mentioned, producing our future colleagues. So what's exciting is students who've been trained in this work are now at the big food companies that I was kind of taught to complain about, right? That's a great question, Girjia. I'll get to that next. So like Redeema is a Danone, which you probably know by the brand Dannon, but it's a huge company. Alex is at Puratos, which supplies bakery ingredients. Peter is now back in Pittsburgh because of COVID, but was the chef at the Verna Coffee in the Four Seasons. So they're actually out there, you know, kind of bringing the skills they learned to the real world. We have a great advisory board of industry leaders, again, from startups through multinationals. And then I mentioned our team. So I'll answer Girjia's question, and then hopefully you have questions and things we can discuss. If not, we could talk about other projects and cases and things like that. So yeah, so many food shows. This was the mid 90s. It was early in that, and they really didn't have the vision for it. So culinary arts and food science, great question. So culinary arts tends to be the sort of flavor driven culinary transformation, using technical skills, whether that's heat or other things like marinating, salting, to convert food from raw ingredients to delicious finished product. It certainly uses food science techniques, but first and foremost is about flavor, and most culinary arts focuses on restaurants, hotels, catering, that kind of thing. Food science is an interdisciplinary field that unites micro, chem, physics, engineering, all around the preservation and transformation of food. And the main areas there are food safety, food product development, sensory, food chemistry, food engineering. Historically, those have been very kind of disparate fields. So culinary arts is typically a vocational, like when I was in culinary school, it was really kind of a skilled labor, equivalent to sort of plumbing or woodworking, or it was a craft, skilled craft. And it typically and still is taught primarily at the community college or sort of culinary academy level, grade 13 and 14, lower division, higher ed. Food science is typically a graduate level field, master's or PhD. That is, and it's a challenging field because it integrates so much. You need to have a really strong bio background and biochem and chem and engineering. So it's, in some ways, it's a lot more challenging than doing any one of those things. And food science typically doesn't consider much about the flavor or the taste. It's really about the preservation, the stability, those kinds of things. And food is fascinating from a scientific standpoint because we're talking about, like, everything we're talking about is decaying tissue, right? It's all dead plants or dead animals, and we're trying to slow down its decline somehow, whether that's through processing or preservation or somehow making it stable. But also keeping the sensory properties that we want in that stability, right? Because the easiest way is to just like boil everything to death or like dry it to powder. But we look for other things in our food. So it's really, I think it's kind of miraculous that, like, if you really think about something like a can of tuna or something like that, a very everyday food, but like, if you think like you leave a fish fillet like one day too long in the fridge and it's like stinks up your whole kitchen, and here we are, you can find like a 20-year-old can of tuna and it's totally safe to eat. Like, it's still kind of mind-boggling, and it's not super high tech. It's just boiling, under pressure. But so, and then in between culinary and food science is culinary science, which is actually what I do. So I'm not a food scientist. And it's my field. I'm a certified research chef, and Rachel's also a research chef. So it's the intersection of culinary arts and food science. So enough cooking to make things taste delicious, but enough food science to do it in a kind of stable way. And that's really a natural outgrowth of what used to be kind of more of a cross-functional team approach, and it's just people learning, from each other. Oh, that's a great question, Suma. How do students in the school district of Philadelphia react to the new roles? Correct. So often our hurdle is taste when introducing new foods and Eat Right Philly, even when promoting school lunch products. So the best thing is there was no reaction. So they didn't notice. And I actually talked to a school food service manager and I said, oh, you're using our new role. And she said, no, we're not. We're using Amoroso's. And I said, yeah, but they switched over in April to everything. She said, no, they didn't. And then I checked with our rep from Amoroso. He's like, yeah, we switched everything to your formula in April. So that's the best way. There's so the long story short with that is it's also a good methods example. So there's a test called a triangle test, which food scientists use to tell if you can tell the difference. So it'll be let's say I'm well, I'll use a real example. Let's say I'm reducing sodium in bread. I'll give you two samples of the control and 1 sample of the modified. And I'll give the next person 2 of the modified and 1 of the control. And I'll ask you to tell me which one is different and which you prefer. And so this is also a good sort of qual-quant discussion for methods, and also a good sort of naturalistic inquiry versus lab experimentation. So if I did that with our 40% sodium reduction in our original, 100% of you would be able to tell which was the sodium reduced roll. And some of you would prefer it and some of you wouldn't prefer it, but 100% of you would be able to tell the difference. And that's what we found. So why then, if that is the case, then why did no one notice the difference when we made this change citywide for 18 million rolls a year?
They didn't have anything to compare it to.
Well, that's one, right? Yeah, they weren't doing a direct comparison. Good point. There's another reason too.
You didn't tell them they were different?
We didn't tell them they were different. It's just one day they use the old recipe and the next day they use the new recipe. So we can all tell the difference, but no one noticed. It's really obvious. You're gonna slap your foreheads when you hear this.
Maybe because the packaging and the branding was exactly the same, so they didn't notice.
Right, that's part of it, is you do eat with your eyes, but you're missing a big component.
Was it that there was other stuff, you know?
Yeah, exactly. No one ever eats a hoagie roll by itself, right? So it's always, there's meatballs on it, or there's cheesesteak on it, or there's an egg and ketchup on it. So in context, you couldn't tell. You could tell if you just went and ripped off half a roll and ate it plain, you would definitely be able to tell the difference. But no one ever does that. So the context is important. And I think it's also like, you know, so there was some previously published work that was only able to achieve a 10% sodium reduction starting at the same place from University of Oregon. And they were like blown away that we were able to do this. And because they didn't consider the context, they did a triangle test with 100 participants in a booth, right? And so you get a very different result than if you do it in a naturalistic way, right? So that's I want to get more involved. I used at my previous school, I taught qualitative methods and naturalistic inquiry, and I think it's really important to have that, you know, more prominently, especially, I can't speak for CNHP because I know it's prominent throughout CNHP, but our nutrition program is very quantitatively focused, and I'm trying to push on the qualitative side a little bit, as is Dr. Milliron.
This is really great. Any further any sort of, Jonathan, you had spoken about the sort of switches, right? From you went Kingsborough Community College, then you came to Drexel. How has that been? So for a lot of our postdocs, they're trying to figure out what are the options going forward, right? Like, can they kind of step out of this academic environment, and then should they, shouldn't they? Not everyone wants to be a professor, you know. So what are your insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I love community college teaching. And there's also teaching university. So I think one challenge that I think a lot of students have is if you attended a research university as an undergrad, and then obviously if you're getting a doctorate, it's, you know, more than likely at a research university. That's often all we know. And so, you know, I went to Drexel for undergrad. Well, I went to CIA first, then Drexel for undergrad, and then NYU for my doctorate. And I saw an opportunity to teach culinary. And for me as a practitioner, you know, a doctorate in culinary doesn't really exist. And where it does, it's not very like, it's not the height of culinary education. The height of culinary education is a 2-year degree, an associate's degree following high school, right? So for me, that was the best place to do what I wanted to do. And for also, I think it's for those of you who don't want to be like active researchers, you know, principal investigators, very like hardcore researchers, but want to keep that side up, but have kind of without the pressure and with the freedom to investigate what you want and not just chase the funding. Teaching institutions and community colleges are great because it's still academia if you're looking for academia, but they prioritize the teaching. And so, you know, a difference might be at the community college, if you have a publication, that's amazing, that's great. And if you have a grant, it's great. At Drexel, if you have a publication, the next question is, oh, what's the impact factor? Is it an important journal or is it kind of a BS journal? Or if you have a grant, it's like, oh, great, what's the indirect? Is it full indirect? Is it a federal grant or is it an internal grant, right? There, it's much less, it's about doing the work. So if you get a grant, you're a superstar. If you publish, you're a superstar. And if you teach, that's your most important job. Here it's kind of the reverse. If you bring in a lot of federal grants and you have a lot of top tier publications, you're a superstar, and it's assumed that you're going to be a good teacher. And if you're not the best teacher, it kind of doesn't matter as long as your money keeps flowing in. So it's just a different environment. And I was very comfortable. I was very intimidated by academia, especially because I'm not in I went to an interdisciplinary program, and that is very challenging because there aren't metrics for like, this is the best journal, this is the second best journal, this is what's the typical funding, you know, this % of your salary is typically buyout, and that's the goal. And even within CNHP, it's unclear what the expectations are for different fields, and you know, it's the target is sometimes moving. So I really liked the community college teaching. I left for really 2 reasons that were, well, 3 reasons, and they were all personal. None of them had to do with not liking the job. One was I had a really strong mentor at Kingsborough who I was and I'm still very committed to. And he left the university, or he left the college to go to the business school within the same university. But the business, I don't have anything going with the business school that I could have followed him. The other reason is I was recruited to go to Drexel, and it was just a better move, you know, sort of for my family. And then the third reason is my mom is here, my brother's here, so it made more sense for us to be in Philly, all other things being equal. But I would, in fact, I was recruited for a community college position that would have been a significant pay cut. But I had to think twice about it because I did really love working with those students, and those colleagues are great. And I'm still very connected to my colleagues from my previous institution.
That's great. And you have a lot of industry funding, correct? So not...
Yeah, we have more industry funding than I would say government funding. And so we do have the CDC grant, which I think is important, both in terms of financially for our budgets, but also for sort of our credibility. Yeah, we do, most of our funding comes from industry contracts called research services agreements. From a Drexel perspective, it's seen as highly desirable because money is money, and those are pretty easy to get. You know, the difference between me and another researcher is like some of these federal grants have like 8% funding rates or 10% funding rates. So, you know, you might write 3 or 4 grants in a year and bring in $0. It's not atypical. It's unfortunately like kind of the norm. our process typically, if we write a proposal, it's because someone asked us to put in a proposal for something. So it's much more likely that it's like they're deciding between us and Cornell and Culinary Institute of America for a research project. And so our odds are much better of, 1 in 3 instead of 1 in 8 or 1 in 10. So we typically get the money that we go for, which is nice, but it's smaller amounts. Industry typically doesn't pay $1 million for a 5-year something. It's much more likely to be 25 or 50,000 this year, and then let's talk about next year. And so it's more smaller projects rather than fewer larger projects. But I like that. I like the work, and one of the huge benefits, probably the biggest benefit of that work, is students all get really high level contacts with industry, so that when they're ready for co-op or ready for graduation, they have those relationships and they can move right into the workplace. Because we don't have a doctoral program, so we're really not in food and hospitality. We're really not preparing students for academia, although some, if they want to, that's fine. But the vast majority of our students are looking for entree into industry.
It's really great. Any other questions? Maybe we'll have you come back and share at a later time the way how proposals look in the industry. How do you reach out? Are there calls, or is it all based on contacts? I think all those things would be really helpful to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you. I can answer some of those quickly, or we can spend more time on it if there's interest, whatever you want.
Maybe just give us a quick overview. I guess you're well known enough now that people are coming to you with requests, correct?
Yeah, we haven't really marketed. It's all been sort of word of mouth. I'm open to marketing, but we really don't have the infrastructure. We don't have our own lab. We don't have the staff. I think we'll get there, but we have some developmental work before we get there. And one of the reasons we started the lab was I had contacts from industry. Before education, I was in industry and I consulted more at my previous job. A lot of those consulting clients became Drexel Food Lab clients. The proposal, so when I started at Drexel, it was very cumbersome. Thank you, Nicole. When I started at Drexel, it was very cumbersome for us to work with industry because I'm sure some of you have done COIS entries for grants. So sometimes these industry contracts might be, let's say, a $10,000 6-month contract. First of all, it would take more than $10,000 of effort of the grants office and the PIs and the students to get that work, everything in to COIS and IRB. And sometimes the 6 months would have passed, the work would have been done, and we finally get a signed contract and finally get a cost center set up. So it really, the university was talking out of both sides of its mouth. On the one hand, they wanted these industry collaborations, and they had set up the Drexel Solutions Institute, and they were rah-rah, industry applied, outward facing. But on the other hand, they were so tied up by their own bureaucracy that nothing could get out the door. They've since streamlined that. So there's a chief innovation officer named Shintaro Kaido, and there's the head of the Office of Applied Innovation named Dr. Bob McGrath. And they worked with general counsel to give us a really lean, straightforward agreement. So now we can work with people very quickly. And we have a proposal template, and we can write a proposal in a day, and we can get a contract fully executed within a week. So our life is much better now. And then if we're not doing human subjects, we're off and running. if it's a sensory test or something that we would need IRB exemption or approval, obviously it would take longer, but that you would have anywhere.
Thank you. Any other questions? I loved when you said, when May was playing in the kitchen. Gosh, if you have a kitchen, we'd all love to come.
We have a kitchen. So we're currently sharing space with the Department of Food and Hospitality. So this summer we'll have our own little space for like our office and equipment and supplies. And then the kitchens we share with the department. The long-term plan is for us to have a designated space in the Science Center. We're not included in the new building, so it's been a little bit of a slog to sort our space situation out, but we'll keep trying.
All the best. Any other questions at this time?
If any of you are doing food-related work and want to engage with us, I'll put my email in the chat. You can also ask Cynthia or Dahlia. And we meet typically, it changes every term for the hands-on work. I think the summer is going to be either Wednesdays or Thursdays, pretty much all day. We try to do all of our lab work on one day, so it's more efficient. And then we have like lab meetings via Zoom, typically Monday mornings. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, this is really good. Any other questions at this time?
Oh, but this was so interesting. It's almost like you opened my my world, to what there is, because it's part of everyone's life, right? And
Yeah,
it's interesting to even think about how would that connect to what I am doing? Are there any overlaps or what? It's just fascinating to think about those elements of sustainability, of how does this affect the world?
yeah, that's great to hear. I mean, one of my pitches, like when we talk about this with undergrads, is food is the only discipline in the university that uses all 5 senses safely and legally, and also really integrates. I can't think of a field that doesn't have some connection with food, right? So all of the natural sciences, all of the social sciences, all of the humanities, like you can't study art without touching some sort of food representations, right? You can't study any sort of science or health without getting to food, right? So even things like kinesiology and stuff, it's tied to movement in the kitchen, and there's so much. So yeah, it's a fun field.
Before we go, just a quick plug for our next upcoming Tuesday topic. If you're interested in interdisciplinary work, that session is the Atlas Pain Care Group is talking about their interdisciplinary mentoring framework next Tuesday. So that's Sarah Wenger, Scott Horowitz, and Sarah Tomazeski. They're from Scott's from Creative Arts Therapy. The other folks are from Rehab Science. So if you want to learn more about that project was funded by the Dean's R3. So maybe they can talk a little bit about that too, if you're interested.
Great. Thank you. And thank you so much, John. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope you hopefully have a new postdoc in your lab as well.
Yes, we are advertising. That's on my list, actually. I have to follow up with you and Darren about advertising a little to get some more targeted candidates. But thank you, and thanks for having me, and thanks for your leadership. I don't know, sometimes people don't realize how great things are when they're in them, but like when I was a doctoral student, the only person I talked to really was my professor, and then we had like a seminar, but it was not this kind of like formative, constructive helpful seminar. It was everyone's going to present their research and be attacked about their methods seminar. So this is like really refreshing, and thank you, Girjia, for putting it together.
Oh,
and,
thank
and
you
Darren.
for the speaker. I feel like we are attacked enough in the rest of our lives, right? Rest of our
Yeah,
day
exactly.
and down. So let's use some time to kind of learn and learn from each other. And especially in the last year, I feel like with COVID, all of us are paying attention to food and food preparation more.
Yeah,
You notice that too. And we are all, I'm familiar more with the creative arts therapies, and you're absolutely right. Culinary arts really engages all of our primary senses. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
think we get. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone who joined in today. Please continue to attend our series, and you'll see everybody's started out like you and gone on to do whatever felt right. And if you haven't read John's book chapter. It'll really give you insights on how he made choices while sort of really staying true to his own values and belief systems. So you might find some ideas and insights there as well. All right, thank you so much, and see you all in July. Bye. Thanks, Darren.